recognition of the times we are in today. The government has a huge fiscal deficit staring at it. There is a decline in direct tax collection. So, in a very, very tight fiscal situation, I don't expect much from the budget. And I have been saying this over the years that we as a nation have to stop expecting, financial budget as an occasion for the finance minister or the government to give out doles or give out benefits or, it is a time in the year where the government is setting out its fiscal planning agenda before the parliament, before the people of the country. And we have to see it from that perspective. So when I look at it in this situation, the government's biggest challenge is how to increase revenues, how to source revenues. I think from a personal finance standpoint, we would be better served if they do not come up with any new tax, but yet recognizing that from a fiscal prudence perspective, they may need to. So if I may just think of what could be the possible areas where we could see a tax come in, I don't see a change in the personal tax rates per se. And as a policy, directionally, government has already set forth a new policy last year of a concessional tax regime where you would pay a lower tax rate without any deductions. So directionally, that's where we want to be able to go, is what my expectation is of the government's intentions. In terms of, could there be a COVID cess or a solidarity cess or a defense and internal security cess as was suggested by an earlier Finance Commission report? Possibly. And could this be at all levels, or could this be only at the 30% and above rate? Possibly it would be at 30% and above. Many people at low income levels are really impacted by the already sky high inflation. So I expect a cess to come in probably at 30% and above. If the government wanted it to, really complicate it further, maybe they could look at a graded cess at a higher level of income as well. But there's a definite possibility of this, and which should be also in keeping with what's happening across the world. When I was looking at it across many parts of the world, there is something similar that has come in, which is the solidarity surcharge or a cess. There is also, a cry going around from a tax activism perspective saying that this is the time for the government to bring in some sort of equitability in tax rates and taxing of incomes. That it is always believed that the higher incomes or the rich or the wealthy get away by paying lesser tax than should be done. This could be also the time where we may see some sort of a higher surcharge yet again coming in for higher income levels. I do not expect any kind of estate duty or wealth tax per se to come in, but there could be a surcharge at higher levels of income. You have to also collect money. So again, continuing on that theme, maybe introduction of infrastructure bonds to raise revenue, to finance capital expenditure could make a re-entry into the system. There's also been suggestions that, any other, whatever name you want to call it, some sort of borrowing from the public by way of bonds could come in. One sure source of revenue for the government, if it is really wanting to kind of take on the stock markets, could be the long-term capital gains tax on equities, where there is already, again, a change that was made by introducing a tax on long-term capital gains in equity, which was untaxed earlier. So that change has already happened in the last two budgets. But maybe this year they could further bring in some kind of an increase in the long-term capital gains tax rate in the capital markets transactions, as well as maybe long-term capital gains on property markets. Now, these may not be well received, but I am only thinking what is the option available for increasing or collecting revenue. So these are some of the things that I think could possibly come in by way of additional tax collection. Now, if I were to think in terms of what would be an incentive to the people, and particularly the segment of the audience who's watching that from a personal finance segment perspective, I think government really needs to think about incentivizing consumption. It's not a secret that consumption is at an all-time low. So what could government do to incentivize consumption? And congratulations to the government for bringing in an innovative scheme like the LTC cash voucher scheme, though the amendment is still to come through. And I also expect possibly that this could benefit could go on for the next year as well. But maybe something similar to that LTC cash voucher scheme could be introduced, like cash vouchers to employees by an employer, which is not in the nature of salary, but very tightly controlled, where you stipulate that this must be spent on goods which are subject to GST. And this is something, again, I read Belgium has done very successfully. So, this could make sure that we identify sectors in which where the government wants consumption to happen, like travel, tourism, sports, culture, cinema, things that have really, taken a hit. That could be a way of incentivizing employees. It could also cheer people up a bit. They've been really, from a perspective of mental health, not being able to give much importance to cultural events, etc. So as it goes, that if this money could be well spent on consuming, even if it is a purchase, that would do that. Then again, incentivizing consumption, say by spending on vehicles. We know that last year government gave a deduction for loan taken for purchase of electric vehicle and for property. Now maybe that could be extended to help people change their cars, maybe not necessarily linking it to loan, but incentivizing again a purchase of an automobile. That could really help that sector, which is really depressed. So there's also an expectation that the government could help the housing or the property real estate sector by increasing or removing the cap that is there currently on interest on housing loan. There's a cap of 2 lakh rupees. If that could be removed, that the sector would get a further boost. But again, one has to balance that, whether the government can afford to let go of more revenue. But if the government has to make a choice, then this could be one of the wise ones to increase the cap here. Because that will indirectly help the economy and would serve the government's agenda as well. The other thing that they could look at is, and which would help make people, really buy a very necessary health insurance policy or a life insurance policy by giving adequate benefit for that. This would again be helpful. Then there is a long-standing demand that, as the entrepreneurial fervor kind of again picks up, given people are now maybe have lost jobs and they're setting up businesses on their own, some sort of incentive for people who are setting up small businesses. For startups in particular, this demand of deferral of tax in case of ESOPs for all startups and not limited to what was earlier allowed last year under Section 80IA. So those are some of the things that could bring cheer to the public from a personal finance standpoint. On working from home expenses, I think there is a lot of expectation, and I have heard my colleagues also talk about, is the government going to give some kind of an allowance for working from home? Thinking fiscally and thinking it both from a tax perspective, from a government's perspective, I don't expect any kind of tax break for working from home, kind of an allowance per se. But I also have a point of view, where a business or an employer gives to its employees any kind of table, chair, desk, computer, peripherals to enable an individual employee to kind of deliver on their work-related responsibilities. There's no question of tax. This is a business expenditure where you want the employees to function in all kinds of situations. So where they are not able to utilize the office infrastructure, so a table or a chair, which is just to enable an employee to be able to do their work-related responsibilities, there is no case for taxing because it is a business expenditure. And of course, you will follow all the rigors that one would have for a business-related expenditure. I do not see a case for any kind of allowance for being considered, work from home allowance being considered non-taxable. That may not happen.